Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the last part of my lecture on fallacies. Thank you for your patience. So, you just watched a famous ad, the Willie Horton ad from the Bush Dukakis presidential race. So, in this ad, Bush is clearly saying, well, clearly implying that Dukakis supports the rape and murder of young couples, or at least doesn't care about it, right? He's willing to let the Willie Hortons out into the world, and doesn't seem to care about it, right? Just because this one thing happened, he is claiming that this is, the almost deliberate result of Dukakis's policies on law and order, right? So you can see how he's exaggerating and using this thing that happened to make it seem like this is exactly what Dukakis wants, and Dukakis is okay with this kind of stuff, right? So again, exaggerating something that happened, use something to exaggerate and twist the policies that Dukakis has in order to make him look very bad. And again, a lot of people think this ad was part of what allowed Bush to win it. It was a powerful piece of persuasive advertising that really used this straw person very well to twist people, or to give people the impression that Dukakis is soft on crime. Okay, so that's a good example of straw person argument. A couple more to talk about. Red herrings. So these are just plain distractions from the logical argument by the introduction of an irrelevant claim. Sorry, I froze for a second. So a couple examples. This is me talking to a student. Mr. Jones, I need an extension on my paper. Oh, Billy, why is that? I was out of town all weekend, then my car broke down last night. And I would answer, but didn't I sign this paper 3 weeks ago? Right? So this student is trying to give me a red herring, distraction from the fact that they've had 3 weeks to work on this by saying that, hey, I couldn't work on this weekend, right? So again, taking away from the logical arguments, the bigger issues, by trying to introduce an irrelevant claim. And we see these all the time, red herrings. People will, you try to have a discussion with somebody and they'll throw in some relevant fact and you're like, well, how does that fit here, right? A one that's related to this, to a red herring, is kind of, I would call a form of a red herring, is my last fallacy I'll talk about, and that's called whataboutism. So this is distracting from one issue by bringing up a seemingly related issue that shifts blame or focus. So you can see how that's close to the red herring, right? Red herring is just a kind of umbrella term to cover any irrelevant points that are brought in to distract from the argument, right? And whataboutism usually starts with what about. That's why it's called whataboutism. So for example, Mr. Jones, how come I only got a C on my paper? Well, Billy, for one thing, your paper was filled with spelling mistakes. But Mr. Jones, what about all the spelling mistakes in your PowerPoint slides? See, what about? What about that? And trying to shift the blame as though my own spelling mistakes had some kind of relevance on the grade that Billy got for his paper that was filled with spelling mistakes, right? And so I know that's kind of maybe a sillier example, but here's one that happened not too long ago. This was, you might remember this with the Crimea Peninsula. It was in the news a lot a few years ago. This was Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Russia annexed this part of Ukraine that they claim belonged to Russia. They still control it now. And it was basically a military takeover of part of Ukraine. Whether it's justified or not, I'm not claiming that. I'm just looking at the logical fallacy involved here. Because when he was asked about the annexation of the Crimea Peninsula by Western reporters, Putin didn't address the criticism. He didn't say, hey, we own that land, this is our land, or whatever. He didn't give any kind of, he didn't address the actual issue. Instead, he said, what about Iraq, right? Or Iraq, sorry. What about Iraq, right, where America went in and invaded Iraq? So he was shifting the blame rather than deal with what he's doing in the Crimea Peninsula. He was saying, well, what about what you're doing here, right? So shifting blame onto the other person. Okay, so that's this is one you'll see a lot in politics too. Instead of addressing the issue or answering the question you've been asked, you say, well, what about what you did, right? So anyways, you'll see a lot of these in politics, all the fallacies. And that brings me to, I guess, my concluding point is that, fallacies can be very effective rhetorical techniques. When I'm talking about them, I'm showing you these very flawed examples, but they happen all the time, and they're sometimes very subtle and can be very tricky, right, to unpack. And people won't always agree that something is a fallacy, right? Some people will look at an emotional argument and say, "Oh no, that's valid," or they'll look at a slippery slope argument and say, "Oh no, I see the links in those points," right? And sometimes, fallacies are not black and white. Sometimes they're very tricky and subtle, and not everybody will agree on what is a fallacy in every case. So they are powerful rhetorical techniques as well for you. Well, I mean, that one could use. I don't want you to use them, but everybody slips into them sometimes. And again, they can be very effective, but they are very unethical if you're knowingly using something like this to try to convince your opponent. Okay, and that's about it for now. Thank you for your patience with the videos. Have a good day.